Today, we're going to talk about post-processing noisier, higher ISO images than I normally work with. I've been shooting a lot with long lenses, super telephotos, and I'm just blown away with the quality that you can squeeze out of these modern high ISO files with the latest post-production technology that we've got. So we'll jump in and I'll show you some tips and tricks to get the most out of those higher ISO files. Hey everyone, it's Hudson. Welcome to this week's video. We're going to talk about high ISO images, noise, and some ways to process those to get you cleaner results. It's important what you do right at the start of that editing pipeline. Before we jump in and do that, I want to make sure everyone knows they're invited to the open office hours group photography meeting that we're holding on June 21st, 10 a.m. Pacific. You can join us live on Zoom or YouTube Live, or you can watch it archived on YouTube. But to ask questions, participate, sign up, please go to hudsonhenry.com/office hours and you can leave us a question there while you're at it. We're going to talk about some work with super telephoto lens in low light conditions, shooting wildlife in Costa Rica. David Archer and I are actually there leading a group of fun workshop participants. I'm really looking forward to hanging out with this group in the jungle right now while you're watching this. So after we get back, we're going to have that big group meeting. We'll show you some images. We'll talk about some things that we learned. We'll talk about shooting with long lenses and techniques to do that in general, and we'll answer some of your questions. So join us for that. All right, so I've been shooting a lot with this new 800mm lens. It happens to be Nikon, but whatever brand you're shooting these days, there is such amazing dynamic range in our digital files, lower noise in the higher ISO files, optical performance out of the lenses. It's just a dream time to be a photographer. And I think more and more of us are taking advantage of more affordable, longer lensed optics, shooting with apertures that are a little bit narrower than we traditionally needed when we didn't have as good a high ISO performance. And the thing that's really great is that the software has come right along hand in hand. There are a whole bunch of different options. I'm really loving DXO Pure RAW, and I've been experimenting with the new files out of this 800mm PF lens that I'm shooting with DXO Pure RAW 2, and I've really been loving that. So I'm going to show you how I integrate that into my workflow and really do some amazing cleanup of the file before I ever start even into processing it. So we'll jump in. I'll show you how to integrate DXO Pure RAW into your Lightroom workflow and how I use it to get way more out of noisy, higher ISO RAW files. All right, fun. So let's do some post-production. A lot of you know I've been a kind of a big fan of DxO's original Pure RAW. They launched Pure RAW 2 not that long ago. It got Z9 file support. I've been excited to try it out, and so I kind of thought, you know, I love the fact that it's got Lightroom integration too as a plugin, so I thought I'd check it out. And the news I have to report is I think it is doing a phenomenal job eliminating noise while leaving a nice, clean, detailed image and differentiating subject from background and not adding any artifacts, all those kinds of things that I really liked about Pure RAW in the beginning. Its Lightroom integration is just a little bit rough. You know, it may improve over time, but I've got a kind of a workaround to show you how I'm integrating it in my workflow. And the difference that you can make in a high ISO image, whether you're out shooting with one of these new big super telephoto lenses or working with a lens that's not very fast, or you're looking at older files that just didn't have the ISO performance that we'd like today. I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to show you how I've gotten such a nice clean image out of a 4000 ISO Nikon Z9 file. You know, and as I told you last week when I was showing you files out of this 800mm lens that I've been having fun shooting with, you know, there was this moment when this hummingbird came down and started grazing through the flowers right near me on the trail last week, and I shot a couple hundred frames in a minute, and that was no exaggeration. I've marked my favorites as 2-star images, so I'm just going to use the filter panel right here in Lightroom and filter down to the ones I marked as my favorites. And then, you know, even then it was tough to differentiate. You know, I'm not showing any of the files that are marked for deletion. I'm only showing files that are 2 stars or greater that I've marked that way. And so we've jumped down from like 1,000 images to 183 total from this time out in the wildlife refuge. But I can color down further to the ones I've decided, ooh, I really want to take some time and edit these, which I marked with a flag just by hitting the P key. And I've got a couple of them in here. Actually, I want to showcase something for you first. That this image right here, well, let's take a look at it bigger. This is the image that is kind of my favorite from the sequence of the hummingbird. Nice and sharp, you know, not distracting, shows that beautiful bokeh of the lens. I've cropped to get just what's interesting from it. This image started as this, slightly underexposed, you know, shooting at 4,000 ISO, 2,500th or 2,500th of a second to get that wing frozen. And you can see that from the Z9, that file is a bit noisy, you know, and instead of jumping into this noisy file that I care about, which has this level of sharpness and detail in it, and trying to use the detail panel in Lightroom's Develop, or some other piece of software if I'm using OM1, you know, if I'm in OM1, I'm gonna jump into No Noise AI, which is integrated into that software, but with Lightroom, I'm going to run over to DXO Pure RAW 2.0. And I did that, brought back this file, which I've done some raw processing on, and then cropped in to get this keeper with a little bit of editing. And the thing I love about the DXO Pure RAW is the fact that even after it runs, it doesn't tend to overdo it. It doesn't add any artifacts like some of the other, you know, noise reduction software from others out there. And you know, I'm not the biggest fan of Topaz. I know a lot of people love it, but I feel like DXO Pure RAW's softer hand with my file and leaves it to where I can sharpen it after it's done without artifacts blooming in it. And I'll show you what I'm talking about that. So let me turn off. Let's get down to just images I've flagged. Close down this stack of images I worked on, and then this is actually the next file. So this file that I've already worked up and done a bit of raw processing on was 826. 827 or 833, whatever, it's close enough. It's right in there. So I guess it was 826 and then 833. So a few frames later, a really similar shot and nothing done to it. This is just straight out of the camera, you know, zooming in into 100%. Looking at it raw here, and I'll just run through the same process that I did with that prior file. So before I even do anything else, I don't even need to go to develop. To get in and utilize DXO Pure RAW, what I'm going to do is go into File, and I'm going to go to Plugin Extras, and down here I've got Process with DXO Pure RAW. That's how you're going to get DXO Pure RAW 2. And I've got a link to DXO Pure RAW 2 in this video's full description, as well as over on my website. Those links help me out. So if you're going to try this out or use it or decide to purchase it using my link, is much appreciated. But go ahead and click here, Process with DXO Pure RAW. And it's pretty simple. What's going to pop up? I get this little dialog box. And I can choose raw processing method is high quality prime or deep prime. I tend to like deep prime. Do you want to do optical corrections? You can say you don't want to or you do. If I was doing something like focus stacking or blending it with another frame that I wasn't doing this work on, I wouldn't have it do lens corrections and that DXO sort of sharpening and stuff. I am going to have it do this because it does a great job of it. I think DXO is really wonderful with these corrections. And you have to realize, well, I'll talk about it in 1 second. I want my format of output not to be JPEG. I want it to be as close to RAW as possible, a DNG. And then when it comes to a destination folder, you know, I've actually chosen that to be on my desktop. I created a folder over on my desktop called DXO Prime Temporary. So it's on my physical hard drive where my software is. Just temporarily, it's going to be there. That's the thing. It doesn't work very well putting it in a folder inside the original images folder, and I'm not exactly sure why that's the case. I'll show you what I'm talking about though. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say process, and essentially what DXO is doing here is it's taking that raw file, it's demosaicing it through DXO's raw processing engine. It's going in, doing the lens corrections and some sharpening, and at the same time doing this advanced noise reduction that Deep Prime does. What's going to come out of it is a somewhat processed raw file in DNG format that has a lot of latitude to go in after the fact and work on in Lightroom. It's not exactly like raw processing in Adobe Camera Raw because Adobe is not doing the demosaicing and initial raw interpretation of your data. That was done in DXO's RAW processor. That's one of the things people need to understand is you can't really use two RAW processors at the same time. So we're going to be doing metadata editing using Adobe Camera Raw through Lightroom on a file that was demosaicked in DXO. But the reason for it is because DXO does such a beautiful job with its deep prime without you even making a choice at holding on to detail and getting rid of noise. Now, one thing that I find a little bit annoying, it goes through and it does it really quickly, but it takes DXO a while, and I'm not sure why, to bring the file back into Lightroom and import it. It's like you can go off, make a cup of coffee. You can do a batch of these files, you can have them all run, you can do 20 of them, but if you're gonna do that, I would step away for a while and come back. You can see right here, the clock, it's 4:51 p.m. I don't know exactly when this is gonna pop back into Lightroom. You might sit around here thinking, well, that didn't work, but go away for a minute, do something else, come back, and you'll find that it's imported that file, and I'll show you where it goes once it imports. Well, wait, it popped up. I have my, it's imported the file. It was 2 minutes, essentially, but it's brought that file in, boom, there it is. Because of the filter, it wasn't marked as flagged. So it kept its 2-star rating, but it didn't bring the flag rating in. It's got all the metadata except for the flag. So it was filtered out by not having the flag checked on it. I'm gonna go ahead now, turn my filters back on, and it's put us into this collection. So the way DXO Pure RAW does when it brings a file in, it creates a collection in Lightroom called, it's in a collection bin called DXO Pure RAW, and then it puts it in by the date. And all I do is I open up the folder that I was working in, and it renames the file. It's the same as your original file name with a 2 and then DXO Pure Deep Prime. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this file that's right here and I'm going to move it into my 800 millimeter folder where all these other files are. So it just moved that file from the temporary folder I had on my desktop into the folder on my network attached storage drive where I keep all my photos. Boom, now it's going to be in there, right there, boom. All right, so what we have now, if I was to go into the grid view, you'll see we've got the DXO Prime version and the original version. It sits right in front of it because of the file naming. I'm sorted, by capture time or by file name. And all I need to do is select the both of them, make sure that the DXO Prime version is the one that's super selected, not the original. And then I'm just going to right click that pair that are selected, go into stacking and say group into stack. All right, and now what we have is our Deep Prime version. And I want to just show you, let's go in here and have a look at both of these images. All right, and this is the new DXO Pure RAW processed image. This is our original. Huge, simple difference right there. I think you can see it. Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing, the level of detail that's retained. And the great thing is there's really no herky edges or artifacts like I've seen with a lot of other software like this. And you can go in and do your own sharpening after the fact. So let's jump out of here and I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so that is my process. Make sure it's marked. Bring it in, it's going to throw you into that collection, drop the file into the original, and then just stack it with the original. You just move it over into the folder. So here we are in Develop. I'm going to close down my left panel. I'm going to close down my right panel. I've got this new file that we just created. And I'm going to go into detail really quick and just do a little bit more sharpening yet. So if I go down, I hold the Option key or the Alt key, depending on whether you're Mac or PC. I get a nice black and white view that shows me just a less distracting view of sharpening. You could overdo it, terrible. But coming back, wow, look at that detail. Come back. And then what I tend to do is I'll do just a little bit of luminance noise reduction because I see just a little noise coming back as I sharpen, just a tiny bit, and then I'm going to grab my mask and you can see there's still some noise there underneath, and I'm dragging this masking slider over so that I'm saying I only want to sharpen edges bigger than this. And now you see I'm sharpening only what really matters to me in the scene, which is his feathers and face. And boom, that's the kind of sharpening I would normally do, but it would never look this good. You can see a little piece of pollen falling as he's working that flyer. We could go in there and zap that if we wanted to. I kind of like it, but if you wanted to, it would be as easy as tapping that with the dust and spot removal tool. Wow, so boom, there you go. All right, how would I go ahead and process this then? Well, you know, the first thing I would probably do, I would take my white slider and move it up just to get me some more contrast in the scene as a whole. I'm looking at my histogram up here, and it's just a little underexposed. I bring my whites up, pull my highlights back a little bit to create some contrast in that background back there. I pull the blacks back. I'm just adding contrast. I boost my shadows a little bit, not too much, you know. And then what I want to do next is do a little bit of masking and just work on the bird itself. Some really subtle dodging and burning essentially, but with the nuances of having digital subject detection that we've got in this new version of Lightroom, in this latest version of Lightroom. And what I want to do is I'm clicking my masking button right here below the histogram and develop, and I want to go ahead and say select subject. Check this out. Here it comes, boop, all right. Now it's selected some of the flowers, all right. So what do I want to do with that? I want to click this mask. If you're seeing something that's this small, just click this little double chevron to the side section right there. And then we can click here and we can say we want to subtract from the mask, and we want to do it with a brush. And I don't want any masking. I want my flow to be 100%, feather to be nice and soft. I'm going to make a click in here. I'm going to just make my brush bigger with the right bracket key. And you can either use your Wacom tablet, or for me, for this, actually, I'm going to make my feather really small. I want a nice hard edge. I don't want to paint on the bird's beak any more than I need to. And I'm just painting that selection off the sharp bit of flower that the software couldn't tell wasn't my subject. Boop, there it goes. So that's removed. All right, now I really just have the bird selected. And now I can do all the same kind of raw processing adjustments. Let's say I want to just boost his exposure just a little tiny bit, just a smidge, just a third of a stop. I'm going to bring shadows up on him just a little bit. Contrast, let's just make him pop. I could bring up just a little texture without adding any texture to the background. And even saturation, just a smidge, all right? Well, what if we could do the same thing but darken the background like a vignette, but only darken it around the bird? One thing I wish Lightroom had would be the ability, after doing this kind of nuanced brushing and subject detection, to just invert it and create a new mask. It doesn't do it that easily. I have to actually create a new mask, say select subject, do the same thing over again. We're going to see exactly the same result because the same software is running. And then I click on the subject and say invert. Right, here it goes. Now it's got the flower selected, a bunch of the flowers selected. So what I want to actually do is add with a brush. So I'm adding to the mask. The mask is now the background. I'm going to work on the background. And I'm going to do the same thing just in reverse. I'm going to paint some of that out. And this is where, you know, if you jumped into Photoshop to do some of this masking, it would be a little bit more powerful, but you wouldn't be working in RAW anymore. This is maybe one place where, you know, Photo RAW from On One excels a bit, being able to do this kind of work and copy masks and paste them and invert them and paint on them and be able to do that all in a more nuanced way. However, this is pretty cool right here. So now that we got that mask, that's the whole background, we can just pull it down to darken it a little bit and make our bird just a smidge again, like a third of a stop, right? And we could desaturate just a little tiny bit, that green in the background, to just get that realism. I don't like the oversaturated look. And I love the bokeh from this lens, but we could even pull texture down just a smidge. I don't want to do too much because I love the sharpness of these flowers, but I want the bird to just stand out as the insanely sharp element in the scene. And boom, to me, that's really raw processed. And then I'd just go ahead, I would grab my, my crop tool, and you could simplify the whole thing just by whoop, you know, bring your crop in. And that's the beauty of 46 megapixels, right? Look at the ability to work on that guy. You know, if you wanted to square crop, You could jump in here and say, I want it to be a square crop, and then scooch over and maybe just leave it off that one distracting background plant. And there you go, bam. So, you know, to go essentially from this noisy but sharp and beautiful image to this in just no time at all, using the modern amazing technology we have available to us. It really does pair so well with the new sensors and new optics and lenses that we're working with that I just don't worry as much about a lens not being quite as fast as lenses I needed to use in the past. When I can take a 4500 ISO image off a 46 megapixel sensor and get to a result as beautiful and printable as this, that is exciting stuff. All right, so I hope that helps you a little bit thinking about your workflow, whether it's with, you know, long lens, you know, narrow aperture, faster shutter speed, wildlife and sports action, or whether it's with older files that just have a little bit more of a noise problem. This is a great workflow, and it needs to start from the get-go before you even touch the file, running it through that noise reduction software. All right, everybody, there you go. I hope that gave you a little more nuanced insight into how to handle some of your own higher ISO files, whether they're from a big long lens or whether they're just shot in lower light conditions, handheld, what have you. It's just amazing what the software can do today, and it's fun to take some of your older files and run them through that process and just see how much more quality you can get in largeability, larger prints. It really is astonishing. So quick before I go, one more plug for the office hours. We're holding on January 21st, 10 a.m. Pacific. Sign up at hudsonhenry.com/office hours. We're gonna talk about long lenses and higher ISO images, shooting in challenging conditions, jungles of Costa Rica with longer lenses. We'll share some images and some things that we learned on this trip that I'm on while you're watching this video. And we'll take your questions. So submit those questions when you sign up at hudsonhenry.com/office hours. As always, all the gear that I use and love is at hudsonhenry.com/ATS links. Using those links helps me out. The new 800 PF, if you're on the fence about it, you know, I did a video last week. I would point you to that, and I'll have links to this lens in this video's description if you're a Nikon shooter. It's a really amazing, innovative, lightweight super telephoto that's more affordable than super telephotos of old, even though it's not cheap. So something to check out. I'll link that video in this video's description. I hope that everyone's enjoying the change of season, staying out, staying safe, staying creative. Have fun, everybody. We'll see you next week.